So we've been talking a lot about tokenomics and web3, and I'm I've always been very interested in how this stuff will affect the traditional world, the old world, the, let's say, quote unquote real world, right? The non-digital world yet. And with all the Russia and Ukraine stuff going on and the fallout from the conflict with I'm watching it unfold from here in Singapore, and I'm kind of horrified that at the derivative effects of the war, right? Like, so there's the impacts of the war directly, in Ukraine, people getting killed, etc. But to see the reactions from governments around the world, right, to try and do what they believe is right? But to me, the collateral damage that things like, massive sanctions and shutting off energy supplies and deciding to close foreign reserves, cancel central banks, stuff like that, just got me very alarmed, right? Because I'm quite aware that we're only able to live the way we live now because of a billion different checks and balances that are like super finely tuned, right? So that everything fits, like so that the resources that we have can be shared globally in as good a way as we can manage, right? And this system has been slowly evolving over the last, 50, 100 years, getting more and more sophisticated. And now the world's carrying, 7, 8 billion people. That wouldn't have been possible 100 years ago because we wouldn't have been able to distribute those resources as efficiently as we do now, right? And then, so I just, on one of our calls, I just said, hey guys, what do you think about Web3 or decentralization? How can that help us now, right? When we see, or let's say I'm worried about certain centralized power, centralized authority figures just taking an axe to like this global machinery, right, that is used to distribute resources. People are just unilaterally just taking chunks out of it and saying, oh, sorry, I'm doing this because you're a bad actor or you're a bad actor. And I decide I'm taking this out, right? Of this whole energy, food, communications, travel, infrastructure. So then I just, asked you, Florian and Lovis, what did you guys think? Like, how can decentralization maybe help us going forward as a species or as a culture, however you want to put it, right? Like, I know how decentralization has given people a chance to opt out from, say, inflationary financial systems, right? But how can, hopefully, I don't know if we have an answer, but maybe we could just have a discussion on how maybe decentralization could help make us more resilient to these unilateral actions, right, by certain people in power.
Yeah.
And then maybe we will show in the show notes too, right? Like I think we're all somewhat of a fan, or if not a fan, at least interested in what this Balaji dude has to say about the future and the network state, right? So I've just listened to his latest podcast. I think it was Farnham Street on Farnham Street. We'll link it, but it was 2.5 hours of very mind-expanding dialogue. But yeah, that was kind of a long-winded intro, but just that's why we thought we'd come together to just maybe discuss that.
Yeah. So I think like this, this whole network state idea, and in a way what we are currently doing with the Tokenomics DAO, may be able to give a little bit of an answer of where it could be heading. Because like when we talked about it, the first idea that I had was like, the current structure that we're building with this DAO is that we have people from all over the world participating in this, and showing up and doing something, like adding some value, producing content, joining on consulting gigs, or doing education, or managing the DAO. And that is something that would have been not impossible before, but like very, very difficult for an early stage startup, like to have employees from all sorts of parts of the world, right? And how to even align them and things like that. And so I think Balaji's network state theory is like that these state borders or country borders don't matter anymore. And in a way, like the DAO that we're currently creating, or like other DAOs as well, they are in a way that already, right? You break down these like country and state borders, and you just collaborate with people that have the same interest, and maybe that can be expanded to other topics, such as like supply chains.
We were also talking about we were saying like with state borders, right? Like Web3 helps with those things, like with the DAO, like you mentioned. But then in terms of things like commodities, right? What happens when a state actor says, hey, you're not allowed to buy commodities from this group of people, let's say, right? Like how it sounds, I don't know, initially it feels like it's impossible to get around that problem, right? Because they have the guns and they have the jails. And if they say you're not allowed to buy food from this guy across a border, if your choice is to starve or use a decentralized platform somehow to still buy from this person, I guess, how would it work, you know?
Well, I'm not sure if a decentralized platform would help
Yeah.
in like buying it, because buying at the end is just like the payment that you have to make, right? And you'll like place an order with them for the commodities, and that's something, I mean, you could do that decentralized maybe, but I don't think it will really help you, because the delivery then that's the problem, right? Like how do they
The
then
logistics.
like logistically and ship the physical goods over to you, even though you're not allowed to actually have even made that transaction, right? I mean, maybe what it could do is like align all these different people in a way. I don't know, if people kind of put money, say, into some smart contract to fund it, and it would be big enough to, do something like a Dallas Buyers Club, maybe. There's, I don't know the exact thing, if there's a movie or something, but the idea is like that multiple people come together to then form a like corporation to then order stuff from a wholesaler, right? They get a better price and buy stuff in bulk, which usually only corporations can do. But in this way, like people would do it. They would come together and do it. And maybe that's something you could use for.
Well, yeah. For example, you could, you could form that theoretically. Say, like Jason, you had mentioned in another call that Sri Lanka is running out of diesel, or has run out of diesel. Yep. So theoretically, like maybe the procurement process of the government, I'm not talking about Sri Lanka, but maybe in general, maybe the general procurement process is just super inefficient. So maybe there's just a way to, make it better and pool interest in a commodity like diesel, and basically lock up funds, right, transparently for everybody to see, and then go out and approach a seller. And of course, if that seller is sanctioned, then that will make it illegal to bring that fuel across into that particular country where the buyers are. But let's assume that there's a global market with lots of sellers who aren't sanctioned. So you could, you could probably help private entities organize more efficiently in that way. And the seller would have heavily reduced risk, right? Because maybe usually they wouldn't sell to private people because they don't know about payments, blah, blah, blah. But if you had it on a Web3 protocol where the funds are clearly visible and they're somehow held in a smart contract, then that takes out a lot of the risk, right? So you kind of solve that trust problem, I think.
Yeah.
And so, but of course, so this is like, many hypotheticals stacked on top of each other. But so in general, the governance system is like a central topic, right? When you form a DAO or when you have like a DeFi protocol or something, like tokens often enable governance in the sense that you get to decide on how this project evolves in the future. And I think there's also still a lot of work to do within Web3 to make that better. Because sometimes you see these votes where if token holders, it's like a yes or no vote. And then if 10% of the holders vote, then that's considered a quorum, and then that carries. And it's like, that's pretty low participation. Did they really know what they're voting on? All these questions come into my mind. But then the governance system, like in a democracy, is also not terribly efficient, because it always depends, like what news are they watching, where are they getting informed about the issues, what are they voting on? It's vote about personality,
And they're
blah,
voting
blah,
about
and then
representatives, right?
Yeah.
Not on actual matters.
Exactly. Well, that's the thing, right? Exactly. Yeah, right. So some people will vote on issues, right? Like, oh, well, in America, they're saying like, oh, Bitcoin might become a single issue vote. So like the people pro Bitcoin might get elected now all of a sudden because it's such a strong, it's a very well organized minority, let's say, of people who would push that through. But then, and so like, I think that's cool because I'm pro Bitcoin, but now does that reflect the majority interest? I don't know, maybe. So like, where sorry, it's a long ramble, but like there's several areas where I think Web3 can help. I think one is this idea of immutable information, like make freedom of speech, essentially, like for people and entities being able to share their message without it being censored. I think that's one issue that's kind of flared up in the last couple of years. This idea of governance, because like, people like in Europe, they always like to say, well, Switzerland has a direct democracy where people can like directly decide issues rather than have their delegates vote. But that was considered so far super inefficient because we didn't really have technology to make it efficient. But that could become possible, right? It is very conceivable that in the European Union with 550 million people, they could absolutely vote somehow via an app on their phone on issues. If it was Web3 based, then you could also verify that it's not faked and so forth. I mean, it's a big engineering challenge, but it could be solved. So like there's many like little puzzle pieces that I could see where Web3 can help.
Or maybe we need like a Web3 lobby.
Yeah.
Since our government's controlled by like rich people, rich special interest groups lobbying, right? Maybe the majority interest can, through something like a DAO, just make sure that the government that they have is one that's that's supported by the grassroots.
Yeah. I think I actually read about something like that, where like they were putting together some funds to install someone in Washington to lobby pro Web3 and crypto. I mean, we are definitely not the only ones or the first ones to think about this, because obviously that's the thing to do. If you have a lot of capital, you'll put somebody there or multiple people there that do what all the other industries do, right? Buy the politicians and make them to do stuff in your favor.
And I was actually thinking about it, like after our call the last time, maybe it won't happen overnight, right? It won't happen super directly, but maybe the key to decentralizing these things has already, like the first domino has already started, right? Like if the financial sphere moves towards a decentralized platform, then a lot of these things probably couldn't even happen now, right? Like if money is decentralized, then this unilateral power actually starts to fade. If they don't have that ability to tax and spend, right, then they lose so much of that power. Right now, they're able to spend first and tax you later via a printing press or via raising taxes or whatever, right? But if it was a different platform where they couldn't spend first and then decide how to pay later, these things maybe wouldn't even be possible to sustain. Like maybe if the United States had to tax every dollar they spend for having like 700 bases all over the world, they probably couldn't do it.
Well,
Yeah.
and I mean, underlying, right? They were only able to do it in the first place because of the was it Bretton Woods too, right? Making the dollar the world currency, so to say. Not the world currency, but the petrodollar system, reserve currency. Only because of, so basically that token, the US dollar token, allowed them to extract value from the world economy, and the value accrued somehow to the petrodollar system, and the US had then the privilege to spend it. So in a web3 protocol, often you can see, like, so this is not my work, but other people have done the analysis, that you can see that the value that happens in these ecosystems accrues to the token rather than the companies running it. So for example, there was this guy, I forgot his name, I can look it up, put it in the show notes. He went all in on crypto in 2014, started his own VC, was an early investor in Coinbase, for example, and then like it had great returns, right? Awesome company and so forth. But then later realized, had he just put the money and bought Ethereum, he would have actually done better. So like it's so in traditional world, the company would have been your best bet, because you couldn't, like with Amazon, you definitely want to hold the Amazon stock because you couldn't buy TCP IP. You couldn't buy the protocol the internet runs on, because that's not a thing that's tokenized. But like with Ethereum, for example, you can absolutely buy the token, so you can own a piece of the network, so to say, the closest thing to it.
That's very interesting though, right? Like Flo, remember the conversation on like why would a token have value, right? Maybe thinking about it from that perspective of Coinbase versus the token, owning the equity in the company versus owning the token directly. How come people gravitated towards the token, right? But interesting.
I mean, must have seen the utility of the token, right? And that's why that's why they bought into it, right? And the network effects kind of maybe overtook what the company was doing, because the company would have like traditional valuations, and the traditional valuations would be things like their revenue, but the network like Ethereum, that would have like a different type of evaluation, like more like the people that join, the people that you can pay, and that maybe is something that people have used to evaluate such networks. And so that grows much faster than traditional companies can, I think, or do. That makes sense.
So for me, if I think about it, let's assume that there's a hole in the logic, but let's assume that Coinbase would only be an exchange for buying and selling Ethereum. So the idea is that they can't transact without using the network, right? So like their business doesn't even work without also transacting on the network. And so each transaction and each new player they bring, each new customer that becomes a Coinbase customer also immediately automatically becomes an Ethereum customer, so to say, or user. So basically they're just a fancy on-ramp, right? So they benefit for sure, and their share price will go up, or their internal value of the company will go up. But they're also actually bringing new people into the Ethereum network. And so since the network is the bigger thing, that it'll always gain. It'll gain more because there'll be not one Coinbase, there'll be 10 exchanges. So
Coinbase could fail.
They'll always be better.
Yeah. Coinbase could fail and your investment goes to zero, but if you owned Ethereum, then
I mean, that could also fail and you'd have a different network taking over.
True.
But like, if you'd go
in this case,
network, I guess it would outperform the stock maybe, or the corporation that deals with it.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's probably not the case in every case, but yeah. So what other problems, I guess, are there? Like going back to what you initially said, right? What other problems are there typically? If we look at like the, you were saying like this whole just-in-time globalization thing that we're in at the moment, that definitely is like very fragile and can collapse if like only small things like stop working. And that's what we're kind of seeing now. So what other things, like problems that are out there, maybe you can like describe one or two that we can then look at and see like maybe how decentralization or tokens or things like that could help to improve them.
Yeah, dude,
Yeah.
you had given us that
Sorry,
example with the LNG, with the, we need these terminals and these ships and stuff. Do you remember?
All right. So that Zoltan Pozsar, this guy from Credit Suisse, wrote this article about Bretton Woods 3, right? And he was saying we're entering into a new financial system now, where in the past the gatekeepers or the guys pulling all the levers, they could bail the system out because everything was, there were errors or there were problems with the valuations of things, right? Like one entity would be holding on to an asset and the asset would fail, and the insurance for the asset, the company that was supposed to insure this asset failing, like if you watched The Big Short, you would know what that was about, right? Basically the insurer would fail, and then there's a hole in this system where a huge chunk of value is lost. So how do we make everyone whole again without bringing the system, like the system can take small hits, but it can't take a big nominal hit, right? Because too many people go bankrupt, and then there's this daisy chain effect where everyone goes bankrupt, right? But he was saying in the regime of the near past, a central bank could then say, yeah, no worries, I'll just put a few more zeros, print up a few checks, send it through to this and that person, and maybe it's not fair, but everyone's made whole, so the system doesn't fail. There are some winners, there are some losers, but all in all, everyone still goes about their day. There's still cash coming out of ATMs, blah, blah, blah. What he's saying now is that we have a problem with not nominal things, but real things. So there's a shortage of, say, diesel. What happens if there's a shortage of diesel in Europe, right? The shortage has come about from having a natural gas shortage. And when there's a natural gas shortage, the big chemical companies or petrochemical companies in Europe don't have their feedstock to create hydrogen, which is then added to gasoline, which then gets you diesel, right? So now there's no diesel or a shortage of diesel in Europe, and we need diesel to ship, tomatoes from the Netherlands to Germany, or, wheat from, I don't know, Ukraine to wherever, the bakers in Germany, right? And he's saying in that situation, what can the financial elite do? Like the ECB could print a lot more euros, but it doesn't really serve any purpose because the underlying supply chain shock is already there, and the euros cannot paper over a real problem. You can paper over nominal problems, but not real problems.
So
the
problem is more like a system inefficiency, because like we're not actually like using more gas than we used 1 or 2 or 3 years ago. We're not significantly more all of a sudden, right? So the problem of like natural gas shortage or anything is shortage is mainly due to the system just being like inefficient in ways, right? So maybe that's something that could be addressed.
Yeah, so in this case it's this thing where there's an issue with political decision makers making decisions, right, without maybe not, I don't know, but they might not have understood the the flow-on effects of their decision, right? So their incentive is to get re-elected, and their electorate wants to hear that we can live in a world where we don't need fossil fuels anymore, let's say. And so the guy that comes to power, or the lady that comes to power, says, okay, if I get elected, I'm not gonna allow for new licenses for, I don't know, drilling or for pipelines. So everyone's still then surviving on the pipeline and the drilling license from, say, 10 years ago, but those things deplete, or pipelines break down or need maintenance or whatever, right? And populations grow. And so the system needs to evolve, but then when there's a political decision that's made to say you're not allowed to invest in upkeep and maintenance, then you start having shortfalls. So I guess it's a gradual thing until one day somebody, like how panics usually happen, right? It's always, well, I heard somebody mentioned this really famous line, right, from Ernest Hemingway, where they were asking him, hey, how did you go broke? And he said, oh, I went broke 2 ways, right? Slowly, then all at once.
Yeah.
And I think we as human beings, our behaviors are often non-linear. Nobody cares about paper straws, plastic straws, until suddenly everyone cares about it, right?
But yeah, I mean, like, but then the problem is again like regulation and political fuck ups would be the right English word, maybe, right?
Is that French or English?
I don't know. But
I guess to make a really dumbed down, oversimplified analogy, right? It would be similar to a king saying, hey, I don't like my neighbor for whatever reason, so because of that, my whole country's going to starve, and that's my decision. Sorry, you guys, but to me, this decision is super important. You guys starving is less important than me punishing our neighbor, so we're going to starve, right? So so I guess in that way, you can say the system is inefficient, right? Because there is that bug, let's say, in there somewhere that allows for these decisions to be made in the first place.
Yeah, but I'm just trying to think through like what we could solve, and I don't think that decentralization can I mean, yes, maybe, but that's like very, very, very long shot. I don't think they can solve like the regulatory side. They can't solve the king problem. But if the problem was an optimization problem, like if we could ensure, and that's something that I think they also came out of the Sultan piece, or something that you said last time, right? It was more like you now have you don't, we did this globalization for a very long time, right? And everything then was produced in China. Commodities came out of Russia, Australia, and other places, and they were all like shipped to China. China made stuff and then shipped it to the West. And this now is changing, is what Zoltan was saying in his piece, right? And he kind of said like, we're going to have some deglobalization is basically what he predicts. And that means that the supply chains will be very, very different. It won't be this easy flow from raw materials go from here or from Russia or Australia or somewhere to China, and then they get produced into something and then go to the US or Europe where the consumers are. It'll be very, very different. Like when now, because they have to, Europe starts or the UK starts tapping into their own gas fields, and the US might do that. Then they become the producers of stuff, and they might start to ship stuff to somewhere where it is produced. And it might not always be China. It might be Europe again, or it might be somewhere in Africa. I don't know, but stuff might be like produced in other places again. And then there still might be this whole regulation side of things, but let's say we can't touch that. So the only thing we can solve for is like the whole, I guess, like efficiency, right? How do we get stuff from A to B in a better and more efficient way? And I think like that's something that maybe decentralization can help with.
Yeah.
And the one thing that I read about, and I heard like, again, Balaji talk about this, was like this DeFi matrix. And he said, like, when everything becomes available on chain, then everything can be like traded with everything on chain. I think that's kind of the idea, right? And I know about it because I did research for this piece that I wrote about, like on Citadel. Citadel, their idea is to buy real estate and then bring it on chain, so that for a piece of real estate, you essentially have like an ERC20 token that you can buy. So I don't have to buy a REIT, but I can buy this nice beachfront property in Bondi Beach, and I don't have to buy the whole thing, but I can buy, I don't know, a couple thousands of that, a fraction. But I own a fraction, so I get the 10% that real estate goes up every year in Australia. I get that for my investment, and I maybe have some decision power. So they kind of bring these tokens on chain. So if now somebody else brings, I don't know, gold on chain, then you could trade these two things in like on an automated market maker, and you wouldn't need I don't know, something like the London Metal Exchange. You could completely outsource that, you know, because what happened with nickel a while ago, right? The nickel price was going up, and they just decided to jump in and stop the trading, right? That's, I think, what roughly happened in this exchange, right? So somebody stepped in and said, like, hey, we're going to stop this right here. So, and if you stop trading, then like some of the parties might not like that, right? Because like there's always two people to the trade. So some might want to sell.
They didn't flow. They didn't just stop it, man. They freaking reversed it. So it got up to like, I can't remember the right number, but I think like 150K per ton. And the guy was like, all right, we're going back to 30K on Monday, right? Like that's where it started on Monday. So we're going to start from there again. And then they did it again twice, right? Because every time it went up, they said, okay, that's going in the wrong direction. Let's start again and again and again.
Yeah, we don't like your price. So, but essentially, like, if you had these assets and you would have a decentralized exchange like Uniswap, then you could trade these two assets completely automated. You wouldn't need a middleman like the LME, like the exchange there in London. You wouldn't need that necessarily. I mean, I still don't know how you would settle in the end, like how you would get the oil to another place and then get the gas to another place. But I mean, like maybe just even the trade and the exchange could be done in that way, maybe more efficient. And you could add things like shipping companies and transportation to the whole mix that could also be sold in this like way. I don't know if that's something I'm just thinking, or just wild ideas.
Isn't that basically more sophisticated barter? So instead of going over a currency, you're going direct with the commodities.
Yeah.
But I mean, in certain commodity pairs, it might make sense, right? Trade wheat for oil or whatever. I mean, countries
you could add currencies for it. You could add currencies if you needed to, so you don't have to do barter. But
it'd be trivial to maybe go through like a stable coin that's backed by one of the parties or whatever, right? To go trade in and out.
Yeah, maybe. Ideally, a decentralized stablecoin.
Yeah.
So I guess there's this. So if you think about it, there's decentralization of the. Right now we're talking about how to do it within the regulatory framework, right? So things like Bitcoin, they're probably outside the regulatory framework at the beginning, right? It's just this outside thing that then the regulatory framework had to then take notice of and decide how to interact with it, right? But for the efficiency thing, we're talking about how to use web3 to give better signals and less noise and let decision making, like especially these massive decisions, hopefully they become more decentralized, right? And it's not one point of failure like the LME. Because you're right, like at the LME now, the guys that were going long and were making money, they're now suddenly told to eat a loss. And they're like, maybe if there was alternatives, they would go somewhere else, right? But at the moment, they only have this, let's say, quote unquote, unreliable, if I'm going to just use that as an adjective, unreliable exchange, right?
Yeah. So that's what I was just thinking. So there's there's tons of criticism of capitalism in general, right? And then so I'm generally speaking pro-capitalism. Very much like I'm pro-democracy. I think like, what's the famous quote? Like, yeah, it's a terrible system, but it's the best one we have, or something. But the thing that's happened, and I think that what causes these inefficiencies is not by nature born from democracy or capitalism, right? The stuff that people, I think, are upset about, and they say, well, this is always because of this, bullshit capitalism, is like, well, when you then dig into it, it's like, well, what are you upset about? It actually, in my opinion, or my experience so far, comes down to somewhere where there is regulatory capture, or where exactly what you're describing, there is a centralized point of failure that has somehow got captured and makes decisions in the interests of one group, right? So it's a very undemocratic decision that happens, and has knock-on effects, which then pisses people off, and then they say, "Oh, this is all capitalism's fault," or but it's hardly ever true, because these systems are super complicated, and I mean, these supply shortages looks like are very much caused by central entities interfering with the free flow of the market. So, and then people turn around and say, well, there's a gas shortage. And it's like, well, that's maybe what they say on the news, but like, how did the gas shortage come about? Like, what is cause and effect of that? And then when you dig into it, very often you do find there's a regulator who made a decision that was not very well thought through, and then it has these unintended effects. And the world is run by unintended consequences, right? Like, the unintended consequences are almost always have a much bigger impact than the thing that you're trying to do.
The Cobra effect.
Yeah, exactly. So with that, having said all that, I do think that there's massive opportunity in Web3 to bring in these trustless mechanisms where decisions are made more efficiently and less corruptible, so to say, right? Because if you have
more democratically, right? Like, that people actually get the chance to decide, hey, okay, we hate what Putin's doing. Let's not buy gas, but we own the consequences that, okay, we're gonna go dark this winter and freeze, right? And maybe with a decentralized voting system, you could do that direct democracy thing to say, hey, do we go ahead with this or not?
But then it becomes like, again, it's like information asymmetry, right? And that's probably more the problem, because if the vote's just like, are we gonna stop buying Putin's oil or gas to punish him or not, then most of the people will say, like, of course I'm for like punishing him and not buying any oil. But they don't see the trickle down effects that if they don't buy it, if they stop buying it, then we just won't have enough. We can't heat.
So it's the framing of the poll.
And it's the framing of the poll, yeah. And that can, I guess, like, in a lot of cases still be tricked. So in like you said in the beginning, like we said, like this DAO vote where you need like a 10% quorum, and most people don't even know what it's about. It's going to be the case in every vote, or in a lot of cases. I mean, nowadays it's much easier and much better to access information, but still, will people access it even if they can? Will they look into the whole thing? I'm not sure. Right? Yeah. So maybe that's more of a problem, and not this decentralized governance would help it.
And then you get into this whole thing that how do people get information, right? Because we're all assuming that the internet is open and free, and unfortunately, I hate to break it to you, it isn't, right? Big
Maybe
tech
Elon Musk
companies
is going to change
that. Exactly. But I mean, there's tons of places where you can listen to experts talk about this. There's very independent studies have been shown that there's strong political bias in even like something as trivial as a Google search result, right? So that means we're all being influenced and we don't even know it. And that's the crazy part, right? If I was like, well, I find everything on my search engine, like, you have to assume some level of like unbiasedness, right? But it's not the case. We're all in our bubble. And that's a super tough not to crack. And I mean, I don't know how to crack it, but I do know, and the thing that motivates me to work in Web3 and figuring this out, and also like doing it on the micro level for our DAO. If we get it right there and then help other people get it right in their micro situation, it will have an effect, right, for the macro picture long term. So that's what makes me really optimistic.
Yeah, it's like the people change, right? If you show the people that there's a different way to do stuff, like in and I see this like in the DAO world, right? If you show people that there's a different way to work, will they ever want to go back? Like, you know, with the pandemic, what I really liked was that, you know, all these lockdowns, I've been working from home for like most of my working life because I just was a consultant or did that most of the time. And then I was lucky enough to work for a company, which I work for now, where I can just work from home. That's something like people during the pandemic has just experienced the first time, right? And now they're like, oh, I'm not going back. This is so cool. Like, I don't have to commute for an hour. Or people even like here in Sydney, I bet many people moved from the CBD or somewhere else. They just moved to the beaches and said like, why not live on the beach if I don't have to go to the office anyway, or do it once a week or twice a week? So it's kind of this people change that has now happened. I think that's going to happen in a lot of other areas as well, work-wise, right? So if you could work for a corporation with like 100,000 employees, strict hierarchies, all this stuff, where you have to do like training every week, you have to go to the office every day, you know, from 9 to 5 and all that kind of stuff? Or do you want to work in a very flexible setting? You might even work I definitely work more than that. You might even work more than 40 hours, but you've got your own terms, right? You can start 6 a.m. if you want to. You can take like a 3-hour lunch break and go surfing or spend time with your kids. And then you can work from 8 to 10. But like, you can decide all of that, and it's like super flexible. And if you want to take a month leave, you can. If you want to go to a different country and work from there, you can. And and then I think if people see that, they don't want to go back. And like also like this whole, they have a say maybe in what happens in the company. Like they get ownership. Would they ever want to go back, right? So that's something
exactly
I think is really powerful.
Exactly, and everything you said, Flo, plus what you said at the end was I going to add they become principals, right? And once you're a principal, like when you're a part owner of the thing that you're also building, and conceivably you could do this, you know, you could easily build yourself a gig income from being a core contributor in 2 or 3 DAOs. You start acting like a business owner, right? Rather than, oh, I'm an employee, I punch in, I do my thing, I do what I'm told, and I punch out. And it becomes like, and I've seen this because that's what I've been passionate about for my adult life, is entrepreneurship. And I've encouraged tons of people to do the same. And like, for example, like my sister, you know, she's a excellently trained German hairdresser. She's like a master hairdresser now, but she for a long time didn't own her own business. And so I was like, do it, like go for it. And like, man, her life has changed, not just because she makes a little bit more money, but because she now owns her time, right? She can work as much as she wants. She owns the client relationship. You know, they come to her rather than to the business where she works. Like, and it's a completely different outlook on life. Like it's like really this, maybe, I don't know if it's fitting because this meme has been abused, but it's like being red pilled, right? So like you see the world a different way now. And I think if we can do that, Flo, exactly like you said, the people change. And I think that change will lead to macro change over time, right?
Yeah, Flo, it's so true, Lovis, and you made me think of stewardship. You know, when we were talking about principal versus agent, right? It's in some ways if I was to be super explicit, okay, it's a huge exaggeration, right? But you're like saying you're gonna be a babysitter for kids the rest of your life, or you're gonna have your own kid, right? Like you're both in both instances, you're looking after a child. One's your own child, once you're getting paid to look after somebody else's child. And I think most people would, instinctively grasp that the interactions you'll have with the kid you're babysitting or being a teacher to or whatever, or your own child, will have some differences somewhere in there, right? Like it might be hard to quantify, but qualitatively you would say, yeah, of course that person's treating that kid differently. It's his own kid, right? Or her own kid. And you know, I send my kid to childcare, and I think there's this rule, you know, if you're a childcare teacher, you're not allowed to be in a class where your own child is in, right? And why is that? Why is that, right?
Yeah.
Good rule.
Yeah. So with a DAO, it's like everybody has, or when you have ownership in something, everybody feels like there's this stewardship aspect that something needs to last for the next generation. Like your time scale when you make decisions is suddenly, time preference is suddenly so much longer, right? That event horizon, you're looking not till my next paycheck, not till my next bonus, but no, this thing's going to be passed on to the next generation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Maybe generations
also-
not long, but like they definitely have a longer time horizon.
Yeah. I mean, even with equity stuff, right? Like if you own ownership in an asset, you can pass that on to your kids. You can't pass your job on to your kids.
Yeah, that's very true.
You can't even pass your retirement account on to your kids most of the time. Unless it's, I mean, so this is, right, so I'm talking about the German system, right? In Germany, you pay a percentage of your wages, whatever you earn, your salary, into it. And then once you retire, currently at 67, you can receive money, right? But once you pass away, it's done. You can't pass that on because you don't own equities like in a 401k, like in the US. It's a different system. So that's why I just said that.
Yeah.
No, but you know, Lovis, I was in Australia, right? And I was explaining that to my Aussie cousin, right? Who puts a lot of his money into and invests very actively in his superannuation fund, which is basically the Australian version of, like, Flo would know it in more detail than I do, right? But when he heard that, he was like, what? You can't, what? And, you know, and then when you tell him that there's huge taxation on inheritance, right? He goes like, but everything I'm doing is actually for my kid. Like, so if you're going to take all of that away, why would I work so hard? I might as well just go, you know, chill somewhere and work like 8 hours a day. And if I fuck up, I don't care, right? Because because he works freaking hard, right? He's a very industrious, very creative person, and him and his partner, like he's the mother of his child, right? They work super hard and they're keeping it for the next generation, literally, right? So he couldn't grasp that idea. Like he was like, oh, so if I'm forced to put a huge chunk of my savings in something that will not be passed on, why save?
Yeah, and I guess like ownership changes that.
Solidarity, right? You're funding the system for everybody in a way.
That's true. Yeah.
But then that's fine, and that's a nice idea as well, and it works sometimes. But then when you hear that the inflows are significant and whoever's managing that central retirement fund can't even manage to produce a 2 or 3% return on the capital they get, then you're just like, well, why won't they allocate 5% to Bitcoin? You know, like there's ways to boost that return. But yeah, anyway.
Maybe, yeah. So yeah, I like the conclusion that we've kind of come to, even though I'm not sure if it is a conclusion already, but like that we can't really do too much, but maybe change the people. And that it would take some time, but if the more people get accustomed to having ownership, voting for stuff in direct votes, like we would do in a DAO or in a web3 setting, that would be possible to do it that way. The more people would think like, I want to do this in the country I'm in. I want to do this I don't want to walk to the ballot box and like get some representative that promises whatever and then runs off, gets lobbied, and then does something completely different. I maybe want to have this like direct control over it, right? And I want to have like better control measures over this person if it is a representative, or I want this direct avenue of voting or information, or I don't know what, right? Like this, like maybe even incentives. Like, you know, at Tokenomics DAO, we think about a lot about incentives. I mean, like that's what we do all day. And if you could kind of change the incentives, I guess, in the traditional world, as Jason called it, then if we could engineer these incentives again from scratch, I'm not sure if we do it the same way, right? But it's hard to change when it's already running. It's easy to start a DAO and create a completely new thing, but you can't do this with a state, right? I can't just found my own state here in Australia and then make up some nice regulations and rules, and whoever wants to can come over. That's unfortunately not possible. It would be really cool though.
Well,
Yeah, but
I think
you know,
Balaji, I think, has an idea, right?
Yeah.
How to do it.
But yeah, I agree. It's cool to come to that sort of semi-conclusion. The fact that on a very basic level, if we come to have different expectations on how things should be run, and we come to understand the value of ownership, the value of being a principal, right? Then we would then naturally tend to look towards our governance, right, of the state in, let's say, parallel lines, right? And you know, when you think about it, like when there was the Enlightenment, like a few hundred years ago in Europe, right? The big mind shift was that, oh, every human being has a value. Like nobody should be another man's slave, and we should be tolerant to different religions, and we should separate the constitutional representative government from the church, right? That's a decentralization, right? Like that was the first decentralization between church and state, right? And then after that, it was decentralization of power between ownership of land, like aristocracy, and the, you know, like democratic constitutional representative government, right? That was another decentralization. So I wonder if now the big enlightening behavioral change we will go through, or the revolution that we will go through, is to say, hey, we want to own things. We want to own what we create rather than sell our time, right? Because in the past we were like, we're free, but we're expected to sell our time, and that was okay. Maybe now we would go into this mind phase, right, where we go, no, it's not enough to sell my time. I want to have equity in what I'm doing with my time, or at least have the option to have equity on what I'm doing with my time. And then that might flow on to political decisions, right? Where we then say, hey, we want to own these decisions. This system is supposed to work with us, for us, not, you know, in spite of us.
Yeah. Like we're like on this pathway to decentralize and further decentralize.
Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah. 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 I think that's a really interesting way to kind of think about it. Yeah.
Cool, man. I feel so much less frustrated and stressed now. Thanks, guys. This is like the best psych therapy session I've ever had.
Because we're on this pathway towards decentralization.
Yeah. Well, so to sum it up, right? I mean, I think a lot of people in the Web3 space get that already. That's, I think, probably also why that meme is so strong. We'll just go and red pill, Web3 pill. Let's stay away from the color, because even those have meaning, right? We'll just Web3 pill as many people as we can, and spread the word that there's a different way. And Tokenomics DAO is a great place to think about it and implement it and help other people implement it. So join our Discord, find us on Twitter, do all the things to get in touch, subscribe to the Substack, follow on Medium, and we're just getting started, so it's pretty cool.
Lovis is the king of the unexpected plug.
Yeah.
It's like in every podcast we'll be like, is it gonna be now?
You should do that like random times throughout the podcast, just somewhere.
Do it like these really annoying YouTube ads where we can just we'll record a couple of standard ones and we'll just cut them in the middle of the episode.
Yeah, just when it gets like exciting, sometimes I'm like, they just finished like this amazing question, and you just want to hear the answer, and then they got like, we're going right to a sponsor. So like 15 minutes later, you're like, what's the question again? Yeah.
Yeah, that's when I break my iPhone. Like that's when the iPhone flies across the room.
Brilliant. Cool, guys.
Cool.
Want to wrap it up?
Yeah, let's wrap it up on that high note.
Thanks. Yeah. I think I wasn't sure where it's going to go, but I think we had a nice conclusion to it. So thanks for listening.